The Vikings had a weapon no one could explain, not a sword, not a ship, not a strategy. It was a man. And when that man went to work, the people who witnessed it couldn't agree on what they had just seen. Was it a human being? A god wearing one? Something in between? That fast, that violent, that simple. This is the Berserker. And what happened inside him before, during, and after battle is something historians are only now beginning to understand. Because it turns out, the most feared warriors in the Viking Age weren't just brave, they weren't just trained. They believed with total and unshakable conviction that they were no longer themselves when they fought. That something had moved in. Something ancient. Something that had been watching from the high seat of Asgard, waiting for the right vessel. They believed they were possessed by Odin. Let's start at the beginning. The word berserker comes from the Old Norse. Bear shirt. Ber, meaning bear. Serker, meaning coat. They went into battle wearing the skin of a bear. Or nothing at all. And the sources can't quite agree on which was more terrifying, but the skin wasn't the point. The skin was a signal. A signal to the god. A signal to anyone watching. The man who was here before is gone. Something else has taken his place. Here's what the sagas say consistently. These men did not behave like soldiers. Soldiers form lines. Soldiers hold shields. Soldiers wait for orders. Berserkers did none of that. They bit the rims of their own shields. They howled. They ran ahead of the army alone into the opposing line, without armor, without fear, without anything a rational person would recognize as a plan. And they won. The medieval chronicler Snorri Sturluson described them as men Odin could make blind, or deaf, or terrified, or filled with such strength that nothing could stand against them. He was explicit about it, and this was not a natural state. This was a god moving through a man like wind through an open door, and the man on the other end of it wasn't driving anymore. Odin was not a simple god. He was not a god of goodness or light or easy victory. He was a god of chaos, of war, of wisdom bought at terrible cost. He hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days with a spear through his side to earn the knowledge of the runes. He traded one of his eyes for a single drink from the well of wisdom. He did not offer his warriors comfort. He offered them transformation, and the berserkers were his instrument. They were called his men, Odin's men. In the Ynglinga saga, Snorri writes it plainly. Odin's men went without armor, and were mad as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields. They were as strong as bears or bulls. They killed men with a single blow, and neither fire nor iron could touch them. This was the gift Odin gave. Not courage, not skill. Odin reached inside a man and turned off everything that made him hesitate. The preparation for this possession was ritual, deliberate, specific. It did not happen by accident, and it did not happen quietly. Before battle, the berserkers would gather. They would work themselves into a state that the sagas describe as trance-like, beginning with chanting, rhythmic movement, the biting of shields that would become their most famous image. Their bodies would begin to shake. Their eyes would change. Men who knew them personally described the moment the shift happened as visible, unmistakable. The person they knew was no longer behind those eyes. This was not performance. This was the entire point. The shaking, the howling, the uncontrollable physical escalation were understood as the arrival of the god. Odin entering the body the way a warrior enters a gate, forcefully, completely, without asking permission, and the body responded accordingly. Pain signals vanished. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of caution and self-preservation, went dark. What remained was something older, something that operated below conscious thought entirely. Strength that should not have been possible. Endurance that had no biological right to exist. Wounds that registered only after the battle ended, if the man survived to notice them at all. The Vikings did not have neuroscience, but they had eyes, and what they saw looked exactly like a man whose ordinary self had been vacated and replaced by something that did not share his limitations. So they named what they saw. They called it Odin, because Odin was the only framework large enough to contain it. Here's what made this belief so powerful. It wasn't just the berserker who believed it. Everyone believed it. The men fighting alongside him believed it. The kings who kept them believed it. And most critically, the enemies standing across the field believed it. You were not facing a man who had decided to be reckless. You were facing a vessel of the All-Father, the God who chose the slain, the God who decided who lived and who did not, the God whose ravens were already circling. What do you do with that? What weapon do you raise against a man whose God is standing inside him? Most people ran. Kings kept berserkers in their household troops precisely because of this. They were deployed at the opening of battle, not just for their violence, but for what their presence communicated. That Odin had already made his choice. That this fight was already decided. That the only question was how many of you understood that yet. In the Battle of Hafrsfjord, around 872 CE, the berserkers of Harald Fairhair are described as wolf-coated, howling, shield-biting men who went ahead of the fleet. They were not the army. They were the announcement. By the time they hit the opposing line, the message had already arrived. Odin is here. He is not on your side. The aftermath of the possession was its own kind of evidence. After battle, berserkers fell. Not to wounds, though there were always wounds. They fell into a stupor so complete they could not be roused. Hours. Sometimes an entire day. The sagas describe them waking, confused, emptied, with no clear account of what had happened or how. The Norse called this berserksganger, the going, not the fighting, but the departure. The thing that had filled them leaving the way it came, suddenly, completely, without ceremony. What was left behind was just a man, exhausted, bewildered, often unable to explain the wounds on other people's bodies that his hands had made. If Odin had been there, he was gone now. Back to Asgard, back to the high seat, back to watching. The berserker tradition did not survive the Viking Age. Christianity came to Scandinavia between roughly 960 and 1100 CE, and with it came a god who did not possess warriors. A god who required control, obedience, contrition. The old framework, a universe where the highest god personally inhabited chosen men and burned through them like fire through dry wood, had no place in the new one. One Icelandic law code outlawed the berserker state entirely. Going berserk became not a sacred act, but a criminal one. The god retreated, and without the god, there was no berserker. Just a man biting a shield, which is a very different thing. But something did not leave. The question stayed. The question the berserkers answered with their lives and their bodies every time they stepped ahead of the line. How much of what limits a man is real, and how much of it is simply the man himself standing in his own way? Odin, the way the Vikings understood him, was the answer to that question. He was what was left when the self stepped aside, when the doubt and the hesitation and the animal need to survive were silenced by something larger than all of them combined. The berserker did not summon courage. He surrendered to a god, and let the god do what gods do. Strip away the theology. Strip away the saga language and the ravens and the one-eyed allfather watching from Helitskjalf. What remains is this. A man who believed so completely that something greater than himself had taken over, that his body stopped protecting itself and started doing the impossible, and kept doing it until the god let go. The possession was the weapon. The belief was the mechanism. And Odin was the name they gave to the part of a man that has no limits. Every enemy who ran from a berserker was running from that, not the man, not the bearskin, not the howling. They were running from the look in his eyes that said the person who used to live here is gone, and something far older has taken his place.